All right, we will call this budget workshop to order. We have one commissioner who's not able to attend. We wish Monty well as he recovers from his sickness, and we'll see him at the next meeting. And City Manager, please take it away.
Tonight this is our fourth budget workshop. Third, we postponed one. So our third budget workshop, and tonight we're going to discuss proprietary funds, which are most of our enterprise funds, utility funds, and some internal service funds. I'm getting coached up right. Before we get started, I want you and all of our residents to be aware that this is not being televised on Channel 27. We have some sort of a technical difficulty. We cannot get out on Channel 97 tonight. We'll get that resolved as quickly as possible, but apparently we have some old technology somewhere, and it's giving it up.
Are we on YouTube right now?
We are on YouTube.
We are streaming. Okay, so we have streaming and people can listen.
That's correct. So we have a brief 40-slide presentation that will lead the discussion. Feel free to interrupt at any time. We have a number of funds to go through. We're going to go through electric, water, wastewater, mosquito, and then 2 internal service funds. So that's why the generous number of slides. We'll try to keep it brief, and if we're getting too long, you can give that signal. If you have questions, please feel free to interrupt.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Commissioners. As always, we'll start off with the timeline and process. As you know, as the manager mentioned, this is our third budget workshop. The next couple items on the Commission's agenda in terms of budget are at sometime this month, next week or so, the Property Appraiser's Office will be mailing out their trim notices, which will let all of our citizens know about their proposed property taxes. At the second meeting in August, the Commission will vote on the final assessment for fire rates. And then we also have our final budget workshop. It says if needed. I imagine it is needed, given some of the unknowns at this point in time. And then in September, at your first Commission meeting, you'll have your first budget hearing to adopt your proposed budget and proposed millage rates. We will then advertise your budgets, send them to the state, do all that internal stuff, and then we'll have the second budget hearing where the Commission will adopt the final budget and the final millage rate, and then the October 1st is the beginning of the new budget year.
So jump into the budgeting assumptions that staff took into consideration as we prepared the budget that we'll be presenting this evening. Primarily has to do with utility in our enterprise funds. We anticipated moderate 1.5% load growth in all of our utility consumptions. We propose no change in electric base rates. That's primarily because we continue to struggle with high rates because of our higher than average wholesale power rates, and figuring that we need a rate increase. We need more funding coming into the operation side of the electric utility, but timing's not right, and so we're going to hang in there and staff proposes another year of no rate increases with on the electric side. We have, per Commission's direction some 2 years ago, we propose a rate increase equal to 1.5% for water and wastewater rates. That is equal to the Florida Public Service Commission price index increase. Our water and wastewater funds break even. They generate enough revenues so that we can cover our expenses without dipping into our reserves. Each of those funds, electric, water, and wastewater, utilize a 3.5% allocation that go to the General Fund for Administrative Services to cover actual administrative cost, which wouldn't be confused with the General Fund transfer, which is more of a excess revenues for the cost of doing business. And then we're maintaining infrastructure, so we have a CIP. It's not the most aggressive CIP of all time, but it's enough to keep us busy for the year, what we propose, and that we include a 5% general fund transfer, which we've clearly heard that's what this board wants. The staff supports that. I would just remind you again that you are well below the industry average. That's a feather in your caps that if we continue with a 5% general fund transfer. Very few utilities below 6. I'd say the average is probably 8.5. For consideration tonight is water and wastewater rates, although our recommendation is going to be consistent with past directives, and we'll be presenting our capital improvement budget or program, and for comment, feedback, add this, delete that. First up is the electric system. Just some background information. This is a trend that kind of shows our growth rate with regards to number of customers or number of accounts. And that's important. We see healthy growth in the 2% range. And seeing how fast we're growing population-wise, that just makes sense to everybody. Also see that our energy use is growing. It's a little more jagged. Energy use is very weather dependent. So some years you get mild winter, mild summer, and you'll see, like we had in 2016, it was just a low energy use year. So, but we get very good projections from FMPA on so that we'll know what we expect our energy use to be moving into FY18. Next graph shows the trend in bulk power cost. This can be weather dependent, but it's typically way more fuel dependent. So when natural gas prices are low, you'll see that those big dips like you saw between 2013 and 2016. Natural gas prices have been creeping back up, nothing like the 2008 levels where it was in the $12 per thousand BTUs. We're currently in the 3s, and the projection is we expect to stay in the 3s. Just a little bit, you can go ahead and run that one on out. Just as a reminder, we talk a lot about bulk power cost adjustment. You guys review it every month. You bless it every month. We bring it to you. But that bulk power cost adjustment is just a small portion of what our bulk power costs actually are. Within our base rate, which is about $1 per thousand kilowatt hours, 76 cents goes towards bulk power cost. So every month when you're approving a 10 cent or a 15 cent bulk power cost adjustment, add 76 cents to that and you'll know exactly what our bulk power costs are for the month. So just a quick reminder on that. So how are our revenues split? Here's an area that gets very confusing. I just run this on out. When you get your energy bill, it shows a customer charge, shows a demand charge if you're a demand customer, and those are typically our industrial customers. Shows an energy charge and a bulk power cost adjustment, and show you where that funding goes. So 100% of the customer charge goes towards operations, which is what we do. The two boxes on the expense side, operations, is done at the city level. Bulk power costs are done at the FMPA level. So 100% of the customer charges go into operations. 100% of demand charges go into operations. Energy charges are split. 24% of your energy charge goes to operations, 76% goes to your bulk power cost adjustment, and then the last item is the bulk power cost adjustment. 100% of that goes to the bulk power costs. So out of our total expenses, 25% of the city's total electric system expenses are for operations. That's paying our staff, that's for replacing insulators, all the things we do. 75% of it gets provided to our bulk power supplier. That is an industry norm. Ours is high, but if you have a good bulk power cost, it doesn't really change that ratio that much.
So that bulk power cost, that's our BCA?
That's, yeah. BPCA is the adjustment. The embedded 76 is embedded and is not voted. You vote on that when you change the electric system ordinance, and we haven't done that in 8 years.
This is just an infographic to kind of show the same information in a different way. For every dollar that we spend in our electric utility, we spend about 69 cents of that dollar purchasing the power that we've distributed out to our customers. About 14 cents of that dollar is operating expenses, mostly for materials and maintenance and different things to keep the distribution system running. About a dime of the dollar pays for the payroll for the linemen, the line workers, and the administrative staff in the electric system. 4 cents goes to pay for taxes and intergovernmental transfers and fees. In the electric utility, we are unique in terms of government in that the electric utility is taxed. We are subject to different sorts of taxes, including sales taxes, gross receipts tax, that other parts of the government are not liable for. And then we put 3 cents towards depreciation, towards future renewal and replacement of the system. In your electric operations budget for fiscal year 18, compared to your adopted budget for fiscal year, that should say 2017, not 2016-7. We do see some healthy increases in our revenue. That is primarily due to the increase in our customer base and our load growth. The expenses are increasing as well. However, they're not increasing at the same level as our revenue, which is always a good thing. We actually have a $74,000 increase in our revenue and only a $17,000 increase in our expenses. The main driving factor of that is in the current fiscal year 17's budget, the commission authorized $40,000 of retained earnings to be used for one-time purchases, capital outlay, purchase of capital assets. So that drove our operating income a little further into the negative last year. In the current year, we are still proposing an operating loss, meaning that your revenues and your rates are not sufficient to meet your operating expenses. So the rate structure we currently have is not funding the cost of the system. We do have plenty of retained earnings, fund balance, reserves, whatever you want to call it, in the bank to cover those costs. If you also take into account our non-operating income, which are primarily your interest income and some other small fees, those fees will cover that deficit. However, I think it is important to note that the rate structure does not meet purely the operating cost. But once again, once you calculate the non-operating revenue, we are operating in the black next year in the electric department. Yes, sir.
So in total, all the money is only being spent from electric customers. I mean, we're not digging into something. We're not subsidizing with other. Okay, all right. I mean, I knew that answer. I just wanted to make sure that was clear to the public that we weren't subsidizing. With.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We operate the electric utility in a separate fund, a separate bucket of money, if you will, and the monies do not intermingle unless we are directed to do so by the city commission. And
no, actually, if you don't mind going back, just to point out that in a $4 million budget, expecting a $24,000 shortfall isn't gross or egregious with the amount of retained earnings we have. We could do this 40 or 50 years in a row and still not deplete all of our retained earnings. Not that we intend to do that. That's not the game plan. We believe that in a 10-year horizon, our hopefully shorter, maybe 7 years, that our bulk power costs are going to decrease significantly enough that we will be able to squeeze out another 2 cents on the operation side, maybe get a $5 or $6 decrease on the bulk power side, increase $2 or $3 on the operation side. Net savings to the customer, our rate point looks better, but we'll have more operating revenues long before we get close to threatening our retained earnings. So that's why staff is recommending to go the direction we are rather than a rate increase at this time.
Mike.
Yes, sir.
What was I know we did this for water. I think we did it for electric where we just implemented an index increase. Did we implement that index increase to match the municipal index increase, or does electric have its own index?
The Public Service Commission, to my knowledge, doesn't have any type of price index increase for electric operations.
So we just did that for water,
We did it for water and wastewater only.
but we don't have that for
Don't
electric.
have anything like that for electric. And this is our 8th year in a row. And frankly, if we propose an increase in our base rates with where our bulk power costs are right now, we're currently somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way down the chart in terms of highest rates in the state. If we increased it 2 cents, it'd push us on a little further out there. And I mean, we can explore that if the commission would like, but I think that I see on the 10-year horizon, I see our bulk power costs are going to come down enough where we can afford a rate increase before we ever threaten our retained earnings. And I mean, it's almost at the viewpoint that our savings account is for this. It's going to allow us to ride through a rough patch, a 5 to 10 year rough patch pretty easily, and then we'll make the rate adjustment that we can where it won't have a negative impact on our customers. So these are the capital improvement projects that we have programmed in for this year. They total $412,000. The biggest one is the advanced metering infrastructure project. What you're seeing reflected in next year's budget is half of what we estimate the total cost to be. So we think it's $1 million to $1.2 million total project, our best estimate. So but we also think that by the time we get through an RFP process and evaluate it, that we would only be paying about 50% out of that in next fiscal year, and the balance would be paid out in the following fiscal year. So we programmed in $600,000 into this year's budget. That's a combination of water, wastewater, and electric to fund an AMI project. And that's programmed in. If this budget gets approved, it's not a slam dunk. There's an RFP process. The commission will get several more bites at the apple about the affordability and about whether that's the right direction for Newberry. We won't be cutting a check on October the 1st. There are several steps that we'll be going through if the commission approves the funding. Then the rest of the projects, most of them, as you see down, are listed as programs. These are those ongoing programs. We do pole replacement. An average pole lasts 30 years, so we try to replace 3% a year. 3.3% a year of our poles, and this is the funding source for that. All those others called programs are similar. Those are where we try to just keep our system from all falling apart at once. We try to try to replace transformers when they reach the end of their useful life. Make sure we have 4 reclosers. I think you've all been pretty educated on them about the role that they play with our momentaries and things like that. So we want to make sure they're always in really good shape, and we try to refurbish one of them a year. We have 4. So that's kind of how the programs work. And we have one line extension project. It's a 3-phase extension to Brittany Oaks in the northwest portion of town, and that will help with some electric system reliability both for the residential area. It's a needed project. It also has a little bonus for our wastewater system. We have a single-phase pump station down there that's not doing very well. 3-phase extension will greatly help it out. Do you have any questions about CIP and what the projects may mean, what kind of benefit our residents might expect to see from them? If not, we'll jump into the water utility. Okay, similar set of graphs. This is the growth rate for customers from 2012 to what we project. We're going to be crossing the 2,000 water system customers pretty shortly here. A couple years from now, we'll be crossing 2,000. Water usage, you can see that our water usage is increasing. When for those in the world that are saying, what about water conservation? I will tell you that those increases are resulting from, we just have more customers. And so you can see we've got a slight increase in water consumption, but the next slide shows that on average, each of our consumers is using less. So this graph shows that in 2012, the average account was using 7,400 gallons per month, and on 2018, the average account is using 6,800 gallons per month. I think that now that we're in the second year of our conservation rates, I think you're going to see that have a more dramatic decrease. We still need about 6 months to start to see really good data. That first year is, you don't see the dramatic drop the first year because people are trying it out. That's when they're getting the heavy bills and we're all getting the complaints. Second year, we're starting to change patterns, so I think that it'll be years 2 and 3 that we'll start to see the real good from our conservation efforts. Also, just a little bit of foreshadowing, at the next City Commission meeting, we will be covering readdressing. The county has requested that we reconsider and join their conservation ordinance, and so they've transmitted a letter. It'll be in an agenda package, and we'll talk about these things and whether it's the Commission's will to enjoin itself to the county's irrigation and water conservation ordinance.
In your proposed water operating budget for fiscal year 18, we do have an increase in the charges for service revenue, about $34,000. Again, that's primarily driven through the increase in our customer base as well as that 1.5% rate adjustment. In your expenses, we have an increase in expenses primarily in your personnel and your operating areas, trying to get, as the Commission has directed, some of the utility personnel more competitively paid, and then funding more operating expenses to maintain the system appropriately. One of the things the city staff has done this year is really taken a hard look at our fixed asset listing and gone through our depreciation to make sure things are being depreciated appropriately and accurately. We did find a few questionable items that were being over depreciated. One example would be a water main that's probably a 40 or 50 year asset was depreciated at 5 years. So what that does is it massively over depreciates and causes the city to have to put more money into its depreciation fund before it's really necessary to. So we took a look at that in your all three of your major utilities, the electric, water, and wastewater, to adjust that. So that's why you have a slight decrease in your water depreciation. You'll see a larger decrease in the wastewater side, and that frees up those fundings to go back into the operations and the maintenance of the system on a year-to-year basis. So we do have...
I was just going to comment on that. Throughout the course of the year, as these developments, new residential developments come online, we've seen a phase of Newberry... Well, Newberry Town Center for sure, but I was thinking of the one out here on Newberry Corners. Thank you. Those developments result in, from $500,000 to $1 million worth of assets that come onto the books for us that we roll into our fixed asset database and begin depreciating them. So those types of, bringing on that type of infrastructure can result in a 1 or 2 year period where our depreciation expenses, the amount of money we set aside to maintain infrastructure, going up dramatically, sometimes to the extent that it eats up every penny of a 1.5% rate increase that we are considering proposing. So it's nice to get the additional infrastructure, but as former Mayor Bill Conrad used to point out, all new infrastructure is just a big old cost waiting for the city down the road to maintain it. So just to kind of remind you that as we see all this new development, our depreciation expenses go up.
So we have in your expenses, a $42,000 increase in expenses, which obviously is a little more than the revenue, but we did budget a surplus of revenues over expenditures last year, so we're eating that a little bit, and the water system is still solvent in that its operating revenues are meeting its proposed operating expenses. In your water restricted revenues, which are your development fees, we're proposing to collect the same amount of development fees as we did in the previous year. Our development fees have been performing very well given all the developments happening within the city. The biggest change is obviously in the proposed budget. We are proposing to use $647,000 worth of prior collected development fees for capital projects. That capital project is the expansion of water system down State Road 26, which the commission has obviously approved and we've awarded. That is the city's full investment into the project. Obviously, the city is also working to get $400,000 of that money back through development agreements with the property owners. But that would be further down the line, so the city would be putting that money out up front to build the water main. This does leave us with a generous amount of development fees left in our funds, so we're not depleting our development fees by any stretch of the imagination, and we continue to build into them every year, with this one year as an exception. And then the $46,000 is the annual debt service the city has for the expansion of the water system. Any questions?
This is the listing of the proposed capital improvement projects. If you see, one of your big handouts shows, this is our 5-year CIP. This graph shows the current or the proposed next year's CIP. We just take those projects for simplicity, trying to fit it all on one slide. So the projects that staff proposes are, again, the advanced metering infrastructure being the biggest ticket item on this. Again, it's funded at half this year, half next year. So the water department's full investment would be $300,000. And then you see a lot of programs where we periodically relocate water meters. We have somewhere right around 1,800 water meters in town. Many of them are in really poor locations, so we have a program where we try to get as many of them moved to the appropriate location. Makes it easiest for us to maintain. If you've ever parked in a parking lot and when you got out, you can see that we have a broken water meter right in the middle of the parking area. That's an example of a poorly located water meter. They need to be located where they're not in the middle of a parking area, and they require that type of constant maintenance. Then just a variety of other programs. I looked down. We have probably the biggest project would be the one at the bottom, the water main extension out State Road 26 that has already been authorized. It just hasn't gotten into construction. We haven't started paying any fees yet. Also see that the project just above that is a 6,200 lineal foot water main extension along County Road 337. That project is from the old Jones-Edmonds study that I think dates to 2008, but I suspect y'all have seen it several times. They all have a project number, and so the $46,000 gets us through the design phase of that, and then we would plan construction the following year.
What is the well remediation program?
Jamie is better equipped to speak to that than me, but that is, we have 4 wells in the city, Jamie. While he's coming up, we have 4 wells in the city, and I think this is keeping each in top-notch condition.
As Mike said, we have 4 wells in the city, plus we have a well that has not been properly abandoned at the well field site for the management district requirements. This would allow us to properly abandon that through the state statute properly abandon that and meet the state statute. It also allows for bacteriological cleaning of the well casings periodically to prevent bad bacteriological samples.
Okay, thank you.
On this, which one was it? Oh, here it is. The water system mapping project. Is that something that's required, or we haven't ever done? So
it's not a requirement as in DEP would require us to do it. It is a best practice. I think I've had enough conversations where y'all have been in the field observing our work, and we don't know how to shut down a water system because we can't find valves. Our paper copies of our water system are unreliable. And so this began before I got here. It's a more formalized effort. Like the advanced metering infrastructure project, each one of our utility systems, electric, water, and wastewater, are digitizing their assets in the field. We've got a consultant that specializes in this. That mapping will be available to our staff via the internet, via webs. We can access it from computers in our truck, and we can see where all the valves are. It's actually smart enough that if you say, I've got a break here, it'll tell you all the valves that have to be closed and where they are to isolate that break. So it's this is a program. There's kind of a heavy lift up front where we'd spend, this year we're proposing, I guess, is it $20,000 from the water system? And then there's kind of an annual expected maintenance. Every time a new subdivision comes in, we'll get those maps digitized as well and get it included in our system. It'll assist us with water modeling. So to answer your question, not an absolute requirement, but definitely a best practice. If you're going to be serious about running a very reliable water system, this is the type of technology that you have to take advantage of.
It'll also keep you from boring into a water main over by the elementary school.
All of those things. And there's companion projects in the electric system CIP and the wastewater system CIP, and this isn't the start. We are out the gate on this project. We're probably 25% of the way into this project.
Do you guys, are they using like GPR to trace all the lines, or?
Are you guys using GPR, like the ground penetrating radar, to map all that stuff? Or
We have an expert.
We haven't yet. We will to have to locate some of it. And as Mike said, it's not a statutory requirement to have a GIS map, electronic database, but it is a statutory requirement that any public water system have a reliable map of some form. And we have none.
It'd be debatable if we meet that requirement. And I would say in terms of each system has its own best practices for how you collect the data. A gravity wastewater system, you don't really need GPRs because you have manholes every 300-400 feet. You can kind of figure it out. Electric system infrastructure can kind of just run anywhere. GPR could be more beneficial. Same with water systems. The only evidence of water systems are occasional valve boxes above grade and fire hydrants. So you can hook onto them and trace it as far as you can, but GPR is beneficial with water systems as well.
All right. Just so the commission knows, we are now officially halfway done through the slides. The commission directed several years ago, as the manager mentioned, small incremental increases every year. The PSC's CPI this year was 1.51%. Staff is proposing a 1.5% increase, so we are letting that 0.01% increase go. These are our proposed rates for next year for a residential customer. We are not proposing to increase or change the customer charge. That has remained $8 for the last several years. We are increasing the tiers 1, 2, and 3 rates by that 1.5%, which is 4 cents to 9 cents in each tier. The average impact for a residential customer who uses 6,000 to 7,000 gallons a month would be about 28 cents per month. In our non-residential, again, it's a 1.5% increase. Non-residential customers pay the same tier as tier 2 residential customers. That impact to an average non-residential customer, excluding ourselves, is 48 cents per month. In your irrigation rates are based upon your highest tier. Again, the average impact, excluding ourselves, for that is a 90 cents per month, and that mainly has to do, the reason that one's so much higher is because the consumption of irrigation customer is higher than the average consumption of a residential and non-residential customer. This is our peer comparison, given our proposed rates and the proposed rates of communities in our area. As you can see, in residential, we are the second lowest, and we're just barely the second lowest. Alachua beats us out by a little bit, but Gainesville, High Springs, and Trenton are all several dollars more expensive in the residential. In the non-residential, again, we are the second lowest, with Alachua just barely beating us out, but Gainesville, High Springs, and Trenton being some more than double than us. Gainesville being almost $20 more, and Trenton about $7 more a month. In irrigation, we are not the lowest. We are the highest, but that comes from the commission's signal from conservation rates, trying to conserve water in our area.
Let's just pause 1 second and see if we're about halfway through. Does the commission have any questions about either fund that's been presented? Does the public have any questions about the funds before we get too far away from them? Please come up to the.
Is it off? Okay.
There you
You might want to turn it off. Oh. There's never going to be a commission meeting with me never talking again. Naeem or Ched for the record. I did have a question about the water. Knowing that it's 0 to 4,000 gallons, 4,001 gallons to 8,000 gallons, and then 8,001 gallons and above. In regards to the numbers, if you can kick back to the residential, yeah, perfect. How can we possibly propose maybe, because knowing that families grow, you turn from a couple to couple with a baby, couple with 2 kids to 3 kids or whatnot, the usage is going to increase. How do we come up with a number from 0 to 4,000? Is there a possibility of that changing in the future, of not necessarily the rates, but the amount of gallons for the tiers? Would that be something that can be discussed in the future?
I think Jamie's probably the best to answer this. We did discuss this when we changed this tier, and it's my understanding that 8,000 is the average consumption for a family, but I'll let the expert answer.
Thank you.
My memory might be.
Basically, you use as a litmus test for water 100 gallons per person per day. So for a 3-person residence, you're in the neighborhood of 8,000 to 9,000 gallons a month. So that's kind of how the set point works industry-wide.
The city of Newberry's average residential home is just a shade under 7,000 gallons per day, which is the industry average. So the tier 1, if you were to ask a rate maker, they would say that tier 2 is your water rate. Tier 1 is your special rate for those folks that can get by with using very little water. It meets basic needs. If you're a single family income, or just a few people at home, elderly folks where they have just 1 or 2, if you'll recall, they actually saw a price break when we proposed this tier. In the water industry, there is some variability in the tiers. I see 0 to 3,000, I see 0 to 4,000, and 0 to 5,000. I think that in my experience, 0 to 4,000 makes the most sense, but I would tell you it's variable. In the electric industry, it is never variable. It is always 0 to 1,000 and then above. We don't have conservation rates for electric, but if you do, it's always 1,000. So if you change these ranges, if you'll recall that when we develop rates, it is simply what are our costs, how much water gets consumed, and we have a model that we plug in. We tell it where the tiers are, and it kicks out the rates for us. So if we change the 0 to 5,000, instead of 0 to 4,000, 0 to 5,000, it would cause all of those rates to roll up slightly, or it would cause the tier 2 and the tier 3 rates to roll up significantly. Conversely, if we go down to 3,000, it would cause everything to roll down just a hair. So that's the sensitivity of the model and how that works.
But I think to answer the resident's question, we could certainly continue the conversation. We're still pretty new in this model, so we're
Absolutely.
collecting data. But so far, it does seem it has borne out what staff predicted. The low-income families who are using water as a necessity are receiving a break on their bill. The higher income families that are using water for irrigation, things that aren't trying to keep the baby clothes clean, they're paying the higher rate. So so far it looks like that data is bearing out. But we get 2 or 3 years worth of data, we can come back and have a better conversation.
So next is our wastewater fund. First couple slides again, the trends of what our customer base is growing, a little behind the water system. We have more water customers than we do wastewater customers. Next slide shows what their usage generation, again, kind of following the same trend of growth. The average customer is discharging somewhat less than 7,000 gallons per day of wastewater, so just slightly less.
In your proposed budget for your wastewater operations, again, we're seeing an increase in your charges for services coming from that increased customer base. We do have a reduction in your other revenue. That comes from, we've historically always budgeted that we'd have one type of a connection, and occasionally we get it, occasionally we don't. So this year we just took it out of the budget, and if we have that connection, it'll be an extra perk to the budget.
A boon.
It'll be a boon of $6,000. In your expenses, again, same situation as your water, increasing of the personnel services to get our water utility and wastewater utility staff in a more competitive situation. Operating expenses is funding more into the repair and maintenance of the system as well as the operating expenses of the system. Depreciation, as we talked about, there were some major changes in the fixed asset listing on depreciation on the wastewater side, so that is why you have that $25,000 decrease there, which was able to fund some of the maintenance and operating expenses in the wastewater. In the current fiscal year 17, we did budget a loss in the wastewater system. So thankfully, given the increase in our customers and the increase in revenue, and then some of the decreases in our depreciation and not as fastly growing expenses, we do have a surplus of revenues over expenditures in the wastewater operations.
Gave me the eye. Hey, I know when I first started here on the commission 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, our lift stations it was terrible. Are we budgeting, or aren't we trying to replace some more motors and pumps and all that kind of stuff? Is that, I know that's probably later on. No, I'm talking about, it's probably going to come up what they're wanting to replace.
There's quite a bit listed in your capital improvement program.
Right.
Just as an example, this year we've done a rehabilitation project on lift station 19. We've done a smaller rehabilitation project on lift station 6. We've added some bypass connections and replaced some pumps on several other lift stations. As part of the SCADA project, there will be 3 different control panels changed at our lift station. Lift stations in the wastewater system continue to be a strong focus for us to try to catch up on deferred maintenance.
Well, are we, but we're okay?
We're improving the system. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
I think we're attacking it as hard as we have staff available to attack it. And matter of fact, recently you actually issued an RFP, executed a contract with a contractor to come in and do point and give us work on a certain issue just because the backlog of work was such that we couldn't catch it all with our staff. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are working under a contract situation that Florida Governmental Utilities uses south of here, to where this contractor comes in and does rehabilitation work on lift stations that you cannot perform with your own staff, and it's pre-negotiated labor rates for the type project.
Okay.
Commissioner
Looking at the expansion of the wastewater system, where are we at as far as capacity wise? Because I know once we get to a certain point, we've got all these people that are coming online, we're going to have to start thinking about what our next step is as far as.
As of a couple hours ago, the numbers I looked at, it looked to like we were at 38 to 40% on actual flows on an average, and about 25 to 30% outstanding flow commitments. Those are signed DEP permits for developments that may or may not occur, that the capacity hasn't converted to actual daily flows.
So we're good.
Yes, we had a capacity analysis report done that indicates that the wastewater plant will not exceed its capacity for at least 5 years.
And I believe the plant expansion is identified in the 5-year CIP. It's pushed all the way out at 5 years, but we know it's coming, so we want it on the CIP, and as it gets closer, you'll start to see it moving into closer years.
And for the folks at home trying to watch on YouTube, we're having a little bit of trouble, but we're working on it. So we'll have it all fixed up. Thanks.
All right. In your wastewater restricted development fees, very similar to your water development fees, we projected last year to collect $279,000. We're looking like we will hit that number. So this year we also projected $279,000. You pay $168,000 in debt service to the state. That was for the expansion of the wastewater plant back in 2012, 2013. And then we used $10,000 of it for capital projects, which means you'll be putting $101,000 into your wastewater restricted development fee reserves at the end of next year.
This next slide shows the planned capital investments for the upcoming fiscal year on the wastewater side. At the top is wastewater's component for the advanced metering infrastructure project, as well as, again, a number of programs. We have gravity manholes that deteriorate over time. Rather than replace them at maybe $5,000 and $6,000 per manhole, we reline them with a structural liner material for about half that. We do a few of them a year. Typically, by inspection, we find out which manholes are in the worst shape, and then we take care of those. We have air relief valves in the system that need to be replaced periodically, so we have a program for that. As you look down the list, we replace a valve vault annually. There's some of those spare motors that Commissioner Coleman mentioned. We have a line extension program that's kind of a placeholder. It's budgeted, it's paid for out of development fees, and it typically, we don't have a specific project in mind. It'll be something that comes up down the line where we have an opportunity to pick up a few houses that aren't currently on the city's wastewater system. Mapping project again, the lift station 1 relocation. Lift station 1 is the lift station that is down 255th, kind of catty-cornered from Newberry High School. It's the city's master pumping station, the master pumping station. It is undersized and is in a poor location. It is just kind of tucked in the road right away, right there in those folks' house. So next year we propose to begin a process to relocate it and go through the design. We've had discussions with Newberry High School. We're actually going to move it across the street, get enough land to actually build it like it ought to be. So that's an. Wouldn't mind a bit. So, and there's a split between lift station type programs and wastewater plant. You also see that you budget for 1 auxiliary generator a year. I believe we managed to pick off 3 or 4 this year.
We've got 3 so far this year.
3 or 4 this year. So, got a lot of bang for our buck this year. A lot of opportunity came up that Jamie and his staff took advantage of. And we've got a wastewater tank that hasn't been a public discussion for a while, but we had a tank that was just leaking. It was a steel tank that was leaking, and you know, we've got a temporary patch on it, but all of our structural analysis tells us that we're going to have to do some more significant repairs on it, lest we see more leaks popping up out of this tank, and so that's what that last project is all about, Tank 1 rehab.
In keeping with the Commission's direction, again, we proposed to increase the wastewater rates by 1.5%. That's an 8-cent increase on the residential side. As the Commission remembers, there are no tiers in the residential or in the wastewater side of residential. It's every 1,000 gallons is the 540, that is capped at 15,000 gallons. If you use more than 15,000 gallons of water, you don't get billed anything above 15,000 on your wastewater bill. That's primarily due to, if you use irrigation or large amounts of water that aren't going into the sewer system, we're not going to bill you for that. On the average impact for residential customers is going to be about 48 cents per month on the wastewater rates. On the non-residential, the increase is about 9 cents, and the average impact is going to be about 63 cents per non-residential customer, again excluding ourselves as one of the larger customers. Here is our comparison to our peer communities. I don't know if I can say this loud enough, but on our residential wastewater rates, we are the lowest in the area. So we're second lowest residential water, we are the lowest residential wastewater rates, and we are the lowest by a good bit. The next closest is about $2.50 more a month than we are. And then on our non-residential wastewater rates, we are the second lowest in the area. So we are very competitive in our water and in our wastewater rates. In your other funds, which is one of your enterprise funds and then two of your internal service funds, the mosquito control fund, we are not proposing a rate increase. It's still $1 a month per location. We do have an increase in revenue, again, due to growth of the city. Last year we had we budgeted a loss of revenues over expenditures, and that was to buy some new equipment for mosquito spraying. We don't have any proposed capital outlay, so we are adjusting those funds back into the normal operation funds of the fund, and then budgeting to make a little bit of surplus that we can bank up for the next time we need to purchase some big equipment for mosquito control purposes. In your internal service fund for customer service, remember these funds are the funds that account for your customer service. It accounts for the customer service portions of the city, utility billing functions, just as a way to keep it clean, and then we bill back to the city the cost of running those functions. This year we budget, in fiscal year 17, we budgeted a loss to spend down some fund balance, and that was primarily for some renovations to City Hall, some upgrades to some computer equipment, and all the new stuff you see in the front. So we do propose not to do that this year, but we do have a rate increase to the city that we're charging, but we do have some offsetting increases in external charges for service, mostly application fees and delinquent fees. And then your utility administration fund, which is your fund that accounts for administration of utilities and public works, so Jamie's assistants, and then funds that are for Jamie and his administration, but we don't want to split up a pack of pencils 7 different ways to 7 different departments, so we use an internal service fund. There's about a $1,500 increase in revenue and a $1,500 increase in expenses.
Which brings us back to commission consideration. So the staff proposed 1.5% increases on water rates, and we showed you what that would look like. We proposed 1.5% increases on wastewater rates, and we proposed as healthy a CIP as I think we have staff to administer that will utilize reserves and development fees that the city has accumulated in time without significantly impacting that or leaving us with nothing in those areas. And we I'd like to get a consensus or direction from the commission that we're going in the right direction. With regards to rates, we have to prepare ordinances and we have to do some public notification. So we need to get those issues moving forward now. We have to send a bill stuffer out that says, hey, we're going to have a rate hearing in September to talk about utility rates, and we propose a rate increase of 1.5%, those types of things. Welcome your feedback.
Commission questions, statements, deliberations. Commissioner Martin.
I do not have any apprehension about the waste water or the water rate increases, so that would be my feedback on that, and I'll wait on the capital improvement feedback when we get those two things. That feels like we can kind of get those off the shelf.
Does anybody have any apprehensions about the 1.5? again, that's the index increase. If you don't do that, then you end up 4 or 5 years down the road having to do a 6 or 7% all at one time, and then people kind of freak out on you because the bill jumps up. It's much better to do 28 cents a month, 50 cents a month difference each year than all of a sudden $6, $7, $8 at a time. That was our thinking when we did that. So if anyone has a different thought, now would be the time to articulate it. Commissioner
I just had a comment that I think those charts tell the story. We're right in line or lower than most of the other municipalities, and that I like that. It looks good. So
It
no
is.
problem.
I think there's some education to the community that needs to happen about those comparisons. But okay, so the commission's good on that. Any comments about the capital improvement plans that were presented to us? Commissioner Glanzer?
I just want to make a comment. It might not be right for this time, but I know that when we bring subdivisions in up front, you have a heavy depreciation cost, and that's unpopular. But we got to remember these people are going to be in those subdivisions for decades, paying taxes, shopping, being here. So let's try to remember that there's a good side to it as well as a bad side. I'm sorry, I'll always say that.
Well, and my apologies if I made it seem like it was a negative. It was be aware that when you add $2 million worth of infrastructure to the books, that it shows up as a depreciation expense in the next fiscal year. It's not a negative.
Commissioner Martin?
I'm not really sold on any of the AMI stuff, to be honest with you. I think it's a great gee whiz kind of project. I don't think it really moves the ball down the field for us as far as improving the infrastructure as much as I would like $600,000 to go towards. So I'm not in favor of that. My biggest hang up is really when the one business came in and he said, as far as residents goes, they like it right off of the bat, but after that they don't even ever pay attention to it. I get the whole ease of use and that kind of idea behind it, but to me it's just I don't think it doesn't really work for me, and that's just a huge expense.
What the 300 that you're proposing this year, what does that actually go towards? Because there's two facets of that. Have we all been to the workshop at this point to get presented that information to everybody? Because the first one we didn't have very good attendance, but the second one, but then we asked them back because that we thought there was some value there for everybody to know. So I just want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page about what it is. But there were sort of two parts of the AMI. There was the savings on the staff side, and then in terms of work, being able to track those kind of things, and then the potential savings on the customer side for just being able, especially when you think about the electric bill in terms of your, what's it called when it's 5 o'clock and every peak hours, thank you, being able to adjust. If you got a water leak when you're on vacation, you get a notification, those kinds of things. So the $300,000 that you're proposing this year, does that speak to one particular facet of that AMI potential, or is that the groundwork for, or they go hand in hand?
Well, let me just take a minute to come with a little bit different perspective, but I think it answers your question. We estimate the AMI project, I've been saying $1 million to $1.2 million. It's probably in that $1.1 million range to be my best estimate. Out of that, $600,000 or so, a little more than half, gets us new utility meters, water meters, and electric meters. So that's infrastructure we already own, and but it would all be brand new. So the benefit to that is that during that first 5 years you don't expect a lot of operational cost. And it's also cost that we incur every year. We're just accelerating it. The balance, about $500,000 or a little less, $400,000 to $500,000, is more of an investment in technology. That's the what they call the implementation, just the effort to stand an AMI system up. That's computers and software and web portal interfaces and marketing and all the other components of what makes an AMI system work. So an AMI system is really automating equipment you already use, and in that automation process, you end up having to purchase a lot of hardware and software and smartware people to make all this happen. So half of that investment, or a little more than half of that investment, gets us meters. The balance is the smart side of the equation, gets us technology.
Mike, I'm going to just tell you my reflection of the FMPA that I went, because the AMI technology ended up, by coincidence, playing. There was a lot of conferences or workshops about that. And my take away from that, not being an industry expert, was that most of the new exciting things that were coming down in terms of the technologies were going to be AMI dependent. Would you concur with that, or was that me being awed by the things that the AMI can do?
No, I think you're correct. It's not a fad. It's not one of those things that some will do and be a little more glitzy, and the rest of us won't do. And 20 years from now, no one will think about it. It'll be over with. Everybody will be there. So it's not a matter of if. In my opinion, it's a matter of when. The current governor of Florida believes that if you're unwilling to make that investment, you shouldn't be in the business. He's only got a short term left in office. The next governor may not have that mentality, but the current governor of Florida has been very vocal that if you're unwilling to invest in AMI, you need to put your system up for sale, because he thinks that having an AMI system is the only way to adequately recover from a catastrophic storm event. It might be a little bit of a very narrow focus, but to get back to your question, it's where the industry's going. It's not. It's no longer a question of maybe. That's in 10 years. If you're not having an AMI system, you are missing opportunities to just compete in the market.
Okay, we have one commissioner missing, but I need to hear from others to know, because it is the big ticket item in the CIP. Commissioner McGee.
Well, if you guys haven't figured out already, I am in favor of the AMI. I've been to a couple of the visits to other cities and seen it firsthand as to how it worked, and I know it's a large expense, but I mean, honestly, if we're going to spend money and do something for the community, I know we've spent money on Easton and other projects around the city. This is a project that I see benefiting everyone. You have something like Easton. We put up $1.5 million for that, and not everyone within the city actually gets the benefit from it. This is money that our utility customers pay in. They're the ones that are paying for it. So I see this as, if you're willing to embrace the technology and actually use it, that this is actually, there are ways that you could use this to reduce your consumption. Or I know that there had been talks about nights and weekend, pricing and things like that. We had discussed. The other advantage I see by using it is it kind of frees up staff time. I know that how many people do we have that go around and read meters? Is it one or two, or?
We have two, sometimes three.
2 or 3. I mean, from what I saw during the site visits, was that one meter reader has actually turned into a customer service rep. They're receiving the information every morning, going down the list of alerts that they had, calling Mrs. Smith at her house and saying, "Hey, your toilet's been running for 24 hours. You might have an issue," instead of waiting until 2 months after the issues happen and you get the bill and you come down here and you raise sand or, call your favorite commissioner and let them know what you think about it. So, I see the benefits in it. I don't think it, like you're saying, I don't think it's just a trendy, glitzy thing. I think this is where the industry's going, and I want to be kind of on the leading edge of that technology. I don't want to sit back and wait until it's almost like we have to have it. So that's where I'm at with it.
Commissioner Coleman.
Well, I'm not a fence rider, but this time I am going to be one. I can see Commissioner Martin's, I see all the advantages where Commissioner McGee's at, especially when it comes to freeing up staff and then actually the way it was pretty neat to me the way that it's going to educate the customer about how much usage they are doing, and but like once again, go back, the cost right now, that's what I'm having a little problem with. But I guess to answer you, I'm actually on the fence right now on this.
Well, we don't have to make a decision tonight.
I know.
We're not looking for a decision tonight, but
Yep.
we just kind of, if you guys are all on the same page, we can tell staff to. So let's hear from Commissioner Glanz. Go ahead.
I will say I'm leaning more for the system. I mean, I was impressed with the system when we had it. It was unbelievable. So, and we're going to have to catch up sooner or later. I mean, like Commissioner McGee said, hey, we got to be, when it comes to all this kind of technology. So.
Let's let Commissioner Glanzer, and then we'll open it up for public comment.
Well, I'm particularly excited about being able to educate our users about peak hours, how to save money. This is something we can do for our citizens. I mean, this is, to me, it's essential, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. We're talking about, growth and development and wanting to make our city as good as we can be and attract people. This is a system that is going to help us to put it in our toolbox, so to speak. But to me, the customer service that it's going to allow us to give is key, as well as being more accurate. This past 4 months, my nephew had his water bill was over like $100 every month from where it normally was, and I think that wouldn't have happened. He finally got it figured out, but I don't think that would have happened had we had the AMI. And he's only one customer. I'm sure that it happens maybe more than we want it to, but this system, I've heard, is the thing of the future, and I'm new here, so I'm just speaking from what I've been told, but I really like the idea that we'll be able to give something back to our customers that they're giving us for their money. So I'm for it.
Well, on that note, I still get communications when people feel like their bill was too high, and if with an AMI system, you can go and you can pinpoint. There's no question. I can tell you, well, you turned your irrigation system on at 2 a.m. in the morning, and that's why you use that many gallons of water. You're using it right at the peak time. That's why it went up. So let's hear from the public if anybody wants to say it. Oh,
Do we have any idea what the ROI would be on that? Any estimation of that?
The firm that we've been working with, although it goes through a competitive process, the firm that we've been working with has prepared that business case, and I don't recall off the top of my head. I would, through a lot of hammering, I mean, if you just take their numbers, it's a ridiculously quick ROI. I always have to affirm to them that there are hard savings that are calculable. And if you run an ROI on those, it gets out pretty long, past what some financial gurus would say what's worth to take. And then there are soft benefits that bring the total ROI back into 3 to 4 year time frame. So I think that when we look at that business case worksheet again, I request that we all take it with a grain of salt. That if it shows a 3 year ROI, remember that includes soft costs that won't directly show up in this year's budget, but those are soft benefits. So they still need to be taken into consideration. It's just, don't expect us to see 3 years from now everything's paid off and now we're saving money. I don't think an AMI system, from a hard cost perspective, is a money saver. I think that it It does cost more, but it provides a significantly higher level of service for the customer, and that's where it comes down to a commission decision on where we want to be in that genre. Are we satisfied with as good a customer service as we can provide, and people get information once a month about what their consumption of utilities are, or do we want them to have it available to them on an hourly basis?
Commissioner Coleman and then Commissioner Glanzer.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Does this mean that for the next 2 years, it's going to cost $600,000 to get the type meters so that it would work for the AMI? And I guess these are like the digital type, antenna type meters. You can tell I'm well on.
They're digital with radio transmitters, so that, and they communicate their information back to a home base, which then compiles the data, makes it available through a web interface to any particular customer.
They hop from meter to meter to meter, they repeat, and then they go to a big collector box, and the collector box sends it back to the home base.
Dang, Jason.
I went to
You're good,
Maybe
man.
you should turn your microphone on and repeat that so
Yeah,
folks
yeah,
at home
yeah.
can have that educational moment as well.
The meters have what they call radio repeaters on them. The 1 meter reads, it sends the signal out to the next one, and it goes down the line. And then they actually have these big collector boxes that are hung on the utility poles. They collect all those radio frequencies. Those frequencies are then fed through fiber optic into the home base, which would be, I'm assuming, somewhere here at City Hall.
Ultimately, but the
And then
data
fed
is
into a
ultimately
cloud.
stored in a cloud,
Yeah.
in a secure file server computer somewhere, and one in Little Rock and one somewhere else.
Well, I know this don't matter, but what do we got? A quarter of the meters have the antennas. I know you didn't want me to say it like that, but I mean, do we have any meters like that?
We have some radio read meters, but basically all of our electric meters would be changed out, and the majority of our water meters would be changed out.
Okay, so it takes all of them to.
You would be starting over a total new meter infrastructure.
And before you sit down, Jamie,
That's right.
It's a two-way communication where we just have one way.
Okay.
We can actually ping the meter, and in certain cases, on the electric side, you can disconnect with the system.
So is it like in Bronson with all the whip antennas on the back of the trucks? But yeah.
Just a hair more sophisticated than that.
Jamie, can you ballpark for us, because I know that we already have an awful lot of meters that need to be replaced. So the half of this cost is in infrastructure that is part of the CIP. Anyway, it's just spread out over the next few years, so we would sort of be going ahead and jumping the gun on that. But
Well, just as an example, you have roughly 2,000 water meters. To replace them with a radio read water meter is roughly $193 a piece, I believe, is what we're paying for them now. So that's the potential cost just to change out all of your water meters at one fell swoop. I don't have a number on what we're currently paying on electric meters, but you would be roughly changing out the same amount of those.
okay, Commissioner Glanzer, did you still have a comment?
I just had a comment. Am I dreaming? I thought we already voted on this a long time ago when he gave us the presentation. Did we not? We were just given a
I
go
think
ahead
we,
to look into it? But then
Gave
I'm
the head
sorry,
nod to continue to bring us this information. So now it's the rubber meets the road in the budget.
And
Commissioner,
One other thing is, I know that they talked about this, and I actually talked to a citizen today who was unaware of where her water meter was until she actually had a break in her line. One of the benefits of this is it actually forces an audit of all of our city meters, not only electric, but our water meters too. So, and there were several examples that I heard at both sites where there were meters that were buried and they had never been read. So, I'm not saying we're going to find all this money. These people have been getting water for free, but there were there were meters that were kind of unaccounted for that. So this is a way to actually audit our system. Not saying we have a bunch of meters.
Well, you will physically have to go to each meter and change it out. And as you've seen in your water CIP where we have the meter relocation program, that's the time to relocate things back to the right-of-way, put them in appropriate places. And as part of that plumbing exercise and exploratory exercise, there may be opportunities where there's connections that may be unmetered or may need to be addressed as part of the construction process.
Can I just comment on one thing? If there are meters that are not being read in Newberry, you can rest assured that those folks aren't getting bills. But I want everybody that's in listening distance to know that if you get a bill for us for utility consumption, we read your meter. So when meters don't get read, it's just because the billing system doesn't even know it's there, and we don't send a meter reader to read them. And historically, that happens in utilities. We're unaware of it, obviously, but when we do a massive overhaul and we find a meter that's been installed 30 years ago and never read one time, it won't surprise me.
All right, this is a big ticket item, and it would change the face of water in Newberry. So is there anybody that's sitting in the audience that'd like to comment on it? Come on down. Yeah, so do I need my timer for you tonight? Okay.
Sure. Go for it. Naeem or Chet again. So I love the fact that we're the lowest in the county when it comes to water and whatnot. However, is there a way that we can compare that to other counties in Florida to see where we are at in comparison with them? Because believe it or not, I like to be the one that fights those people that argue that we're the highest in the state of Florida. And I'm like, dude, you've never been to Miami and dealt with FPNL. Trust me when I tell you, you love Newberry's bills. So just to see side-by-side comparisons with the state. Also, the other concern is we're one of the cheapest, and the biggest argument that I get, and I try to defend our city, is the sense of the purity of our water. It seems that our water is pretty pure. In that comparison, is there testing that is repeatedly done by the city? And with this new AMI, I'm sorry if I'm asking too many questions, but with the new AMI, what are the chances of that being rigged or tampered with? And if that's the case, how do I become part of that group of the non-reading meters? Because that would be amazing. But sorry for the list of questions, but it's just concerns.
All right, couple things. The actual worksheet where we do ratepayer comparisons is long. There's a lot of cities in there, and there are 400 cities in the state of Florida that most provide utility service. So when we say our peer group, then they're either close to us in size or they're close to us in proximity. The slides, I think the first time I ever did this, I showed them all. It's like 15, but you can't read them. So we really broke it down to the ones that we care about.
Our glasses because of that slide.
That's right. So, but it's out there, and utility rates, because everybody uses a different rate structure. It is a pretty good exercise in math and developing models, because you go to everybody's. You cannot call a utility clerk in the state of Florida and find out what their rates are. You go to their ordinances. So I'll go to 30 cities' ordinances. I'll download them. I'll put them in the rate model. Otherwise, you cannot trust it. Apples to Lamborghini. So we can do that, and we have done that. I would tell you that statewide, generally, North Central Florida tends to run a little less expensive than other parts of the state for utility service, especially the more urbanized area. Also, our treatment is more minimal. We get it out of the ground, and it's pretty darn good coming out of the ground. If you're Jacksonville and you're taking it out of a river and you have to treat all the pollutants that could potentially be in there, then your treatment costs are much more expensive. So we're very much benefited to have just a great quality of water coming out of the ground. I can also tell you I've spent a lot of years dealing with utility rates. I can look at utility rates of some small Hoboken city in the middle of the state, and I can just tell you straight up that they're just losing money. And there are plenty of utilities in the state of Florida that just flat lose money on their utility system. And when you're looking at the ordinances, you can't see that they're losing money, that they're bleeding. You have to talk to their finance director and say, yeah, we have to transfer general fund revenues every year to keep our water and wastewater plants solvent. Or we go to DEO and on DEP that do the grants and the loans for water and wastewater projects, and they tell you about all the horror stories that you hear. So it can be done, and it is done. It's not necessarily as simple as you might think on the surface. So,
Jamie, can you answer the questions about water testing and quality?
there
As
you go.
far as the water quality, we're required to test for several hundred contaminants per the Safe Drinking Water Act. Some of those tests are monthly, some are annual, some are triannual. Those are federal reporting requirements, state reporting requirements, county health department reporting requirements. We're also, since 1996, all drinking water systems in the state of Florida are required to do basically a report card. That's the consumer confidence report that you got recently. That not only requires us to report if we have a violation of a contaminant, but it also requires us to report if it's detected whatsoever. So the list of things that are reported in the City of Newberry's Consumer Confidence Report, that just shows the detect level. There is no violations. As Mike said, this part of Florida is one of the more pristine parts of the state for the fluoride in the aquifer. The water comes out of the ground almost as pure as you possibly could get and requires minimal treatment, most of the time only disinfection. I've now been a water treatment plant operator in the state of Florida for 26 years. I'm also licensed in Georgia and Alabama, and this part of the Southeast has some of the purest water there is.
And rigging AMI meters. You know, the IT techie people of the world, they can do something. They can do. I won't speak to everybody, but I would tell you that every one of these meters has a tamper switch in it. So when Commissioner McGehee was speaking to that gentleman that comes in the morning and looks at the report and see who may have had utility consumption consecutively every hour of the day, he also have another report that says, hey, by the way, all of these meters were removed. So that people can bypass them for energy, or with a water meter, people have turned them around so they'll spin backwards. So you get that report, and the people that have installed AMI systems said that tampering is usually less than a month-long process before everybody knows that pulling that meter is going to result in someone from the utility department knocking on their front door, and then eventually it'll be someone from Alachua County Sheriff's Office knocking on their front door.
Naeem, did you have a comment on the commission moving forward with AMI at this point in time?
I think if after hearing that and being, I'm kind of like Martin where expenses or whatnot, but if it helps, you got to spend money to make some money, and this is a way we're going to actually save some money in the long run. I appreciate what you guys are doing. And for the record, I just wanted to say thank you very much for all that information. Like I said, I just needed to help my fight against the public that the commission can't fight because of sunshine laws. I fight as much as I can for you guys, and I appreciate that information. Thank you.
Right. Commissioner Martin? Oh, I'm sorry. You had your hand up first. And then we'll turn to public comment.
Mr. Mayor, this is actually going to do we know what we budgeted last year for 16 and 17?
In what budget?
What that for electric?
Capital improvement?
How much was that?
In electric or water?
In electric.
In electric.
We don't keep track of that kind of
Oh,
information.
come on, man.
Sorry, what
do you think?
Mr. Mayor, what is the question?
What did we budget last year in electric?
16 and 17.
16, 7.
Total
Revenue
revenues?
and expenditures.
I know you got that. Man,
I think it was in the slide here.
is it in here?
I think it was in the slide.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It is in the slide.
Yeah, what you adopted last year is in the slide. It's also in this handout.
So your current adopted budget for electric is just over $4.2 million in revenues and just over $4.3 million in expenses.
All right, and how much for capital improvement for last year did we spend?
Did you spend or did you budget?
Budget.
You budgeted $345,100.
Okay, I'm for this.
Can we finish with public comment before you make your comment, Commissioner Martin? Is it fine? Come on now, ma'am.
Good evening, Gail Watson. My question was in comparing the cities in close proximity to Newberry. I was just curious as to why Archer was not one of the comparison cities.
Mr. Manager,
Well, I guess
they don't
one
have a
is
wastewater.
they don't have a wastewater system.
Right.
And two, we talk to peers, they are smaller. Even Trenton is the smallest city that we use in our current peer. And they've had so many issues with water systems not being rate sufficient. They don't generate enough water system rates to cover their expenses. I think it's a disservice to the public to say someone has cheaper rates than us, but their rates don't generate enough revenue to cover their expenses. So I think that we try to show all the utilities we think that have that can demonstrate that their rates are at least meeting their expenses.
Any other public?
And quick research shows that their rates are higher than ours. Just Dallas looked them up online while I was being long-winded. There you go. Ooh. Next year they'll be the first column because we'll be looking really good.
James Lee.
Is that microphone on? Is you got a little? Is that dot still lit up there?
Oh, okay. Comparing manual reading versus electronic, you're probably going to have a paradigm shift from the manual, and you're going to have some staff so there's going to be staff that you're going to use differently, obviously. Is it going to be one-to-one? You're going to swap manpower, put them in a different department. You have to have some more manpower. And according to the slide that you had a while ago, it was $433,000 a year of expenses to administer. How much of that is going to be for collecting data to bill? And how much easier and cheaper is it going to be to bill based on the new advanced metering system?
That's a lot of information.
It's a lot of questions in there.
I will tell you though that it is very astute to recognize that manual meter readers versus maintainers of digital water meters is a trade-off, and generally the folks that maintain digital water meters are more highly trained and probably warrant a little higher pay. And that goes into the analysis that is performed, the rate case study. So in terms of from data backhaul and how the data is handled, we pay a subscription fee. We propose that we're not going to have file servers and we're not going to have IT staff trying to manage all that data. Even the larger companies, Gainesville struggles with that. Ocala doesn't do it anymore. Leesburg has struggled with that. It takes a company the size of Power and Light to handle that type of stuff. So we're going to contract those services out. We propose to contract those services out to someone that specializes in nothing but that. But the actual maintenance of the equipment, the water meter components itself are just the same. There's the electronic transmitter portion of it that do take more qualified staff. The trade-off in terms of hours is projected to be less, fewer man hours. Like currently, I think we estimate is it 50 man hours a month for meter reading, 2 guys, 2.5 days each. So the meter reading effort will go to zero. Our guys, that the information just comes to us as a packet, but we will spend time maintaining them. So the business case, whenever it comes before us, I mean, we've had a lot of good discussion about it, and I think for staff's perspective, if it gets included in the budget, we're proposing to fund it out of reserve funds, depreciation funds. So if the commission, we move further down here, right now it's a staff energy thing. If we move down this and at any point the commission says, you know what, it wasn't what we thought it was going to be, we're not going to do it, it's fine. We'll make a budget adjustment and we'll pull it out. We're not going to stroke a check on October the 1st. We're just going to start taking the steps. The commission will certainly have more opportunity to take bites at the apple. The real feedback we need is, do you want to see it in this year's budget, and should staff continue to work towards it?
May I follow up?
Absolutely.
So you said you had how many meters that you're going to have to replace anyways?
Roughly 2,000 water meters.
2,000 water meters was the answer for the folks
Correct.
at home
If you
trying
buy
to hear.
2,000 obsolete water meters, when it's not going to be very long, you're going to have to replace them again. You're going to be throwing them away. That's junk. They're not, I mean, they're going to have to go away from them because they're obsolete.
Like buying 2,000 flip phones.
Is that
Oh, I'm
correct?
sorry. Somebody still has a flip phone, don't they, over here? No.
Same thing goes with the water meters and the electric meters. I mean, unfortunately, this is the age we live in. So do you want to throw money in trying to fix a problem that you can't fix and play catch up in 5 years, or the next commission tries to catch up?
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Other public comment? Yep.
I was just curious, in Alachua County, which other municipalities have the AMI?
It's an excellent question.
In Alachua County, no other municipalities. GRU is in the RFP process right now. They're doing their homework, their research on it. Alachua is not interested. High Springs is not interested. I would say that within the electric industry, nearly all of the privates have successfully gone there. Power and Light, Duke, Tallahassee has a very robust system. Ocala has a system. Leesburg has a system. Lakeland has a very good system. So there, within the state and within the industry, there are several successes. I don't think we would be leading edge. We would just be somewhere between up front and the middle of the pack if this commission says move forward.
And Commissioner Martin, thank you for your patience.
Just a couple other comments. It sounds like I'm in the minority here, but we're about 3 years from being sort of debt-free. I would like to see us effort more towards doing something like this at that time, or in the middle, somewhere there, because this kind of forces early adapting onto people. I would rather see that more as potentially a volunteer basis for people who want to do that, instead of forcing everybody to pay for that. I probably would not be apprehensive about any of the new developments coming online, being asked to put those in place as they go forward, and then the balance of the people just kind of being a rolling retooling, so to speak. But I can't quite wrap my head around, if the pipe between the plant and the house isn't good, I don't know what good putting a Cadillac meter on the end is going to do for us. I feel like the pipes between the meter and the supply need to be better improved. I'd rather see us spend our money on those things. I think that we will have a lot of unrealized savings on these types of projects. Mr. Lee mentioned you're going to retool these individuals. They're going to command a higher pay. They're going to incur retraining expenses, things like that. You're talking about reducing the revenue, which creates a whole problem on the revenue side of being able to pay for some of this stuff, because now you've got less money coming in to pay for some of these kind of gee-whizzy type things. Again, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I think we're playing in a little bit bigger arena than Newberry, and I don't think that the balance of the customers here in Newberry on the system are the early adapters, which is this, to me, is a little bit more geared towards. We talked about a 10-year horizon. Even if we push this out a couple of years, let the technology get a little bit cheaper, I just would advocate a little bit more along that line of thinking, realizing that I'm in the minority here.
Hang on one second, Commissioner. Is it possible to do one person at a time on a voluntary basis?
I think that that becomes quite challenging. The biggest reason for that is there's these stand-up costs I told you that are probably 40 to 50% of the project. If all of your customers aren't committed to joining the project, then those costs get spread out to the few that participate, the fewer, and it just drives up the unit cost. So that you tend not to see it succeed as well whenever there's that option. So that's one comment. I think your comment regarding timing, that is purely a commission decision. If they want to do it now, do it later. And then there was a comment regarding debt. We spend a lot of time talking about general fund debt, and general fund debt is expected to go away shortly. On the utility side, water wastewater side, we have 15 and 20-year debt windows. We have some loans through the Department of Environmental Protection. They're very low interest loans. They're in the 2% range, but we're not going to be debt free for quite some time in any of our utility. Well, water, sewer. We already are debt free in the electric fund.
And can you remind us, because not this whole thing isn't being funded through a loan. Some of this is depreciation. The whole project for the AMI.
That is correct. We'll have to do a ratio as we get into the cost. If we receive bids and we get into the cost, all the new components would be paid for out of either paid for out of retained earnings, reserves, and like the meter replacement would be paid for out of depreciation.
Commissioner Coleman?
Well, if we're going to be having to replace these meters anyway, the way I looked at it, even if we didn't go with the AMI system, at least we're looking at replacing these. And I ain't going to tell you where I graduated from high school, but I'm looking at a $67,000 increase from last year if we did go with this, everything that's on this electric here. So I'm gonna still stay. I'm on the fence, but I'm still waving more towards AMI on this. And at least, like I said, if we're going to be replacing meters anyway, we're going to be spending this money. I think it's going to be cost effective. At 2019, the end of that, we can say, you know what, we didn't want to go with this, but we got the meters. We got a 2 years period here, so that's where I'm at.
Well, and I think as Mr. New has said, this isn't the end of the conversation. Given the head nod now, let's just move forward with it. So, Commissioner Glanzer?
Well, I like that we won't be going into debt for it. I mean, isn't this what depreciation money is for? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is what we're doing. We depreciate our
meters.
Everything in the city, from trucks to meters. Also, I wanted to just make a comment about being debt free in business. Sometimes being debt free isn't always the best thing. I mean, you have to have debt, especially when money is cheap to borrow like it is now. We're not going into debt for the AMI, but if we did need to borrow money, it's not that bad to have debt, especially if the money is cheap to borrow. The biggest thing to me is to have a balanced budget, which by law we have to. So that's important to me, not so much being debt free, to have that budget balanced and spending our dollars wisely and using our depreciation funds for what they're meant to be for.
Well, we have two enthusiastic move forward with it. We have one person leaning that way. Speaking for Monty, I know he always loves technology. He's on the cutting edge of everything. And he likes to make sure that we are given a prime service. So I think you have enough information to move forward, and we'll continue talking about it, and like you said, we'll have other bites at the apple. Are there any other considerations that the commission wants to bring up about the capital improvement plan before we open it one last time to public comment? Anything else on the plan that is a cause for concern or discussion? Hearing none, does the public have any final comments or questions about anything that was discussed tonight? Mr. New, do you have anything left to present to the commission? Do you have anything that you feel you don't have direction from the commission on?
We do have, we're just going to follow up with what's next for you, but in terms of the information that was presented tonight, there's nothing, we have nothing further. I feel like we have good direction. We understand the direction the commission would like to see. Next step on these enterprise funds is going to be the preliminary budget adoption, which I guess I'm still in Dallas's thunder here. I'll let Dallas tell us what the next step is.
The next budget item that's going to happen, as I mentioned earlier, is the trim notices will be going out in the next week or so to all of the citizens, and then the commission's going to vote on the final fire assessment rates, and then we'll have our last budget workshops. In the August billing, the bill that customers receive in August will have a rate notice to all customers who will be receiving a rate increase in the water and wastewater rates that is required by law. So we will put a notice in those August bills. Advertising that we will be having meetings September 11th and September 25th. At your September 11th and 25th meetings, you'll have the ordinances to adopt the new rates, and the new rates will be effective beginning the October billing cycle.
Okay. All right. Does the public have any final comments or questions before we adjourn? Everyone else up here is good. We are adjourned.